The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question for the United States is what's in our national interest.
My name is John, and the International Criminal Court is now in session. It is August 27, 2025, and once again, we are going to look at the situation within Ukraine. So let's start. First of all, we are going to talk about the Zaporozhye direction. The Russians, after dealing with numerous Ukrainian counteroffensive efforts, were not only able to repel these counteroffensives by the armed forces of Ukraine, but they have now been able to push the Ukrainians back into Stepnogorsk, along with even advancing past these railways here. The Russians literally crossed this river here through the railways, like they literally used all these train tracks here, and have apparently captured this train station. It is unconfirmed though, however. Moving east, we're also going to talk about the DNEPROPETORVSK direction. Now, for those of you who do not remember, during the initial phase of the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Russians were basically going anywhere that didn't have any Ukrainians in them. And that included these series of villages here within DNEPROPETORVSK. So, for more context, after the Russians managed to capture the sizable town of Volnovakha, they advanced west. They nearly took Velika Novosilka, Ugledar, and a few places within the DNEPROPETORVSK region. And among these villages that were contested, Zaporizhzhia, Novohirivka, Ternove, and Berezove. Those were the ones that were contested heavily for. The Ukrainians were able to push the Russians out of these areas, but around just recent, like a few days ago or so, Deep State UA, Radov, and I guess the Vostok group themselves, which is the Russian army grouping in this part of Ukraine, have confirmed that the Russians have taken full control of these villages. Well, two of them, at least for now. Zaporizhzhia and Novohirivka are under Russian control as of this video. And with this, according to my own map, I'm not using the Syriac map, by the way, because he is always so behind, the Russians have control of around 6 villages in Dnepropetrovsk region, with Filia also being contested at the moment. So, if the reports are true about the status of all these villages, the Russians have effectively controlled 7, which is around half of what they control right now in the Sumy Oblast. And also, just for further disclosure, the Russians have announced the capture of Filia, which would bring that number to 7. But the problem, though, is that we don't have enough proof of this just yet, though we can say for sure that the Russians do have control over the southern half of Filia. But I am absolutely certain that it won't be too long before Filia is captured, and then, yeah, we can declare this oblast, no, village number 7 for the Russians in the Dnepropetrovsk region. So, yeah. And with the capture of the settlements here, the Russians have now effectively put the village of Komi Shuvaka in a cauldron. There is no way out of here via roads, and if they want to go through the farm fields, well, good luck, because you're just going to get caught up by FPV drones on flat ground. And also, in addition, it is very likely right now that Ternove or Berezove is being contested right now by the Russians. So, yeah, the Ukrainians are in real big trouble here, logistics-wise. And if you ask me, folks, as I said in one of my previous videos, the Russians have effectively started their offensive towards Guleipol, which is one of the sizable towns left in the Zaporozhye Oblast that is not yet under Russian control. What I think is going to happen here is that they're going to enter Dnepropetrovsk region. They're going to take a number of villages, like take a large chunk of the region of Dnepropetrovsk, and then advance down south towards the town or city of Guleipol. And once they do that, Orikov is pretty much screwed, and the push towards Zaporozhye city itself will start. It's a little too early to say, but it's definitely coming once Guleipol falls, but that may not take place until 2026. So, I digress. Now, this front is very weird. Apparently, the Russians had control over Iskra, Zelenigay, and Tolstoy, but now it seems they don't really have full control of these villages. Ukrainians claimed that they booted out the Russians from here, but the Russians, however, claimed otherwise. And because a lot of these geolocations look very sketchy, like old or out of context, I decided to just put Tolstoy, Zelenigay, and Iskra, a.k.a. Andriivka, Kalistove, in a gray zone, just to play it safe. I'm not going to go into it any further because it's not worth my time, but yeah, there is a big gray zone here that the Russians need to address. And I also think that because of the Ukrainians' recent initiatives that are taking place here, I think they're going to have to cross the Volga River into DNEPROPETORVSK region and take these villages here in order to secure the gains they've made in southwestern Donetsk. So yeah. Now, let's go a little further north, shall we? So, after many months of fighting, like almost endless fighting, the Russians have captured the village of Udachny. Udachny is important because it is a gateway to Dnepropetrovsk on the TO406 road, which would go all the way to Mazova and effectively the strategic town of Prozyana, and also it would go to effectively, like if you go either like north or south, it would take you to either Zaporozhye city or Dnepropetrovsk city itself, or Dnipro. And with the taking of Udachny, the Russians now have a pathway to the Dnepropetrovsk region, like a secured pathway in through the typical roads. Now, I know what you're thinking, but what about Molodetsky? Well, listen, it's not Udachny, it's just a farming village. Literally, it's not really much. I don't know how long the Ukrainians are going to fight for it, but I think now after the fall of Udachny, I don't really know what can stop the Russians from entering Dnepropetrovsk in this direction. And also, because of Udachny falling, one of the flanks into the city of Pokrovsk for the Russians has now been secured. So yeah, the Russians are not going to really have as many issues now going into the city of Pokrovsk as they did before the fall of Udachny. And also, in addition, this is the big one. With the fall of Udachny, the Russians can now also capture the mine in Pokrovsk. The coal mine here. If this mine falls, which I am expecting it to fall sometime maybe during the final days of August, if not sometime in September, if not October at the latest, if the Russians get unlucky there, nothing's really going to stop the Russians from heading for the E50 road. Now, this is the main road that goes to Pavlograd in Dnepropetrovsk. So, yeah. If the E50 road gets cut, Pokrovsk is pretty much cooked. There's effectively no reliable way to supply the city along with Myanograd. And also, the road up north is also effectively cut off by FPV drones. It may not be under physical control, but it's definitely under FPV fire control by now. So, yeah, there's nothing really much they can do there once the E50 road is gone. I mean, yeah, Syrski's going to have to evacuate all his men as soon as this happens. I mean, all the Russians would have to do now is essentially take the mine and then put FPV drone control over this road. And once it happens, it's game over for Pokrovsk. And speaking of the city itself, Russians, despite some setbacks lately in the city of Pokrovsk, are still advancing in the very southern parts of the city itself and have taken over completely this block. In addition, they have also advanced into the Kami block areas in the deep south of Pokrovsk. And as far as I know, if the Russians are able to take this, then there's pretty much nothing stopping them from taking the city as a whole. And then in Myanograd, apparently the industrial area, like one of the industrial areas in Myanograd, has fallen to Russia. So yeah, we can pretty much now consider Myanograd as contested. And also the fields outside of here are also under Russian control as well. Now, recently, there was a report of a counterattack by the Ukrainians taking place in Mayern. But it appears that this counterattack has failed, and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back to their old positions. I am expecting the Russians to make a push towards the villages of Balahan, Kozatatsky, and Promin. Once they do this, they're already effectively in Minograd. Like, that's pretty much it. Like, nothing's going to really stop them at this point from entering the city and perhaps collapsing the entire pocket. This is like literally Avdiivka / Artyomovsk on roids right now, just by looking at it. Rudinsky is pretty much the same. There are advances for the Russians in the Dobropila direction, but nothing too big yet, at least in these villages. But as soon as these series of villages here fall, like Shakove, Sofivka, and Turetsky fall, then yeah, the Dobropila offensive is pretty much back in full motion, and the Russians will take the full initiative once more. I also believe that there are credible reports that Volodymyrivka has also fallen to the Russians. Now, take this capture with a grain of salt, but I think it's probably true, to be quite honest with you. But that's just my gut feeling based on the recent reports I've been getting. And also in the Konstantinovka direction, the Russians have continued to clear out the Ukrainians from the outskirts of Toretsk and have taken complete control over the village of Katarnivka and also have taken half of Klibambuk. There's this big gray zone here because apparently the Ukrainians nor the Russians control this area, and as far as I know, the Ukrainians are trying to evacuate for this side of the river so they can run into Konstantinivka, but as far as I know, they haven't been able to do that, at least successfully, without losing their lives. And also, there are reports that the Russians have also captured the village of Alexandro Shultine, which is not quite fully confirmed yet, though there are indeed now confirmed reports, at least by Ukrainian sources, that Bila Gora has also now fallen to the Russians. Anatoly Radov also said that the battle for Konstantinovka had began, but then he retracted it saying, oh, it's just DRG, so forget about it. He was probably drunk or something when making that claim. And also, some major news coming up north in the northern Donetsk / Lugansk direction. It appears that the Serebryansky forest has fallen to Russia. Now, the reason why I haven't colored all this yellow yet for the Russians is because we don't have enough evidence to prove their complete control over this forest. But it is definitely now certain that the Ukrainians have lost control of it, and the battle for Liman and Siversk is inching ever closer. And also with the capture of this forest, we can now say for sure that the northern flank of Siversk is now fully exposed, especially with the capture of Serebryanka. And in addition, the Russians have crossed the Zarabets River from Torske and have taken control over half of Zarachny. The Russians have also advanced further south from the village of Kolodyazy and have captured the village of Saradine, which is good news for the Russians because that means effectively that Liman is in big trouble. Though not yet, but it is getting there very quickly, if you ask me. There have been conflicting reports over the village of Novomy Kalivka, and to be honest with you guys, I think I'm going to put this village in a gray zone after I'm done recording this video, but apparently Ukrainians had claimed to recapture it along with the village of Hrikivka, but I need to wait a little longer before recoloring these areas in blue. So yeah, bear with me. Now, in the city of Kupiansk, it's arguably one of the biggest news, like, in recent memory, like, throughout the month of August, if not the entire summer so far. But now it is 100% confirmed that the Russians have been able to secure itself in the city of Kupiansk and are advancing modestly. Deep State has all but confirmed that Moskovka has fallen to Russia, along with the very far western parts of Kupiansk being under Russian control. And in addition, Russians are advancing from the north here and looking to take these areas. I put it all in the gray zone because Radov did the same thing. And also, I think Deep State also put them in a gray zone too. So, yeah, things are not looking good for the Ukrainians in the city of Kupiansk. And I think a lot of pro-UA accounts have started dooming over it. If Kupiansk falls to Russia, like basically this along with this entire pocket here, that's going to solidify the Russians once more in the Kharkiv region. And I'm not going to be too shocked at all if the Russians really start rolling back all the gains the Ukrainians made 3 years ago, as I stated multiple times in previous videos. But we're going to have to wait and see what happens in Kupiansk. But I'm also hearing reports that the Russians have completely cut off the city from all supplies from the west and also from the south. And if this were to be confirmed, Kupiansk is effectively encircled. Like, there's no reliable way out for the Ukrainians. The Osko River is not going to do them any good because then they'll just get artillery shelled or droned. And then you have this huge pocket here filled with so many Ukrainian soldiers. Yeah, they're in a pickle right now. Now moving to the Sumy direction, and this will be the last thing we'll cover in today's video. Apparently the Ukrainians started a counterattack here, but we don't have anything too huge yet. And then the Russians have kept control over the village of Verachny despite losing it a while back. And then in the village of Yanakovka, it appears that the Russians are about to take complete control over this area. So, yeah, it appears that the village of Yanakovka is coming under Russian control soon, probably in September of 2025. And with that, they have pretty much secured themselves in Sumy region for the foreseeable future. And yeah, that will be it for today's video. So I hope all of you guys enjoyed today's video. I hope you found it all informative and perhaps me entertaining, I guess. And I'll see you all next time. I'll see you all next week, and take care. Peace out. Bye.